Good lady has the floor.
Thank you. I think excellent points have been made clarifying that this bill is in fact repeal. It is not sideboards, it is not reform, it is repeal. I have a better chance of flying a unicorn to the moon and back than we have of keeping Medicaid expansion if House Bill 138 becomes law. And a lot has been said, the waivers. I know there's speculation that the Trump administration will work with us and will do everything in their power. And let's say that's all true. Let's say they drop everything else they're doing and delegate their entire team to just passing every single waiver that we're asking for. There's still no way we could make this deadline. These actually call on federal courts to reverse themselves. If you look at the 11th provision, it requires that the federal courts, including circuit courts of appeal, reverse themselves on requiring care for transgender people. It would require Congress to change the Affordable Care Act because many of the waivers are not consistent with the Affordable Care Act. It would require judges to rule in favor of challenges to this. There's no way this is going to happen by 2026. It simply is repeal. Now, we don't need to speculate about what would happen in a repeal scenario because we've been there. That is what Idaho looked like until early 2019. And being one of the oldest people, having served here for probably too long, I just think it would be helpful to walk through the history because I've lived every minute of this and how we got there. And spoiler alert, it was not a magical wonderland here before we passed Medicaid expansion where people just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and everybody had coverage and everybody just worked that much harder and it was great. It was terrible. That's why people worked so hard to get Medicaid expansion passed. We had tens of thousands of people in the gap. No matter what they did, they couldn't get coverage. People were dying of preventable illnesses. People were coming in with horrible stories. I'll never forget this one lady talking about her brother died from a mole that he didn't have the money to go get checked out. And by the time he finally looked into it, it had metastasized into cancer through his whole body. It was a disaster. We were spending a lot of money, as the good gentleman noted, on the CAT fund and the indigent fund. And there's a reason why thousands of people worked so incredibly hard. For 7 years, so the Affordable Care Act passed in early 2010. And then the courts said that the Medicaid expansion component was optional. The states didn't have to take it. And for 7 years, this body said, we're not going to take it. This body would not allow even a vote or a hearing on Medicaid expansion. And people were rallying. Thousands of folks were showing up. They were bombarding us, begging us to pass Medicaid expansion. This body refused. And it was at that point that they turned to the initiative. And at that point, this was pretty wild. I mean, there hadn't been an initiative passed since 2002. Nobody thought this was even possible. And I was one of them. I'm like, oh, good luck with that. I mean, go for it. But nobody thought it was possible. It took thousands of people almost killing themselves to get this through. That is how desperate the people of Idaho were for Medicaid expansion. And I heard stories, people with chemotherapy were out there knocking door to door. They put someone on crutches, was out there sitting for 8 hours a day in the farmer's market to collect, a Republican collecting signatures because they were so desperate. And they succeeded. They did it against all odds. They jumped through every ring of fire that was thrown in their path, and they got it passed overwhelmingly. I believe 31 districts voted for it in the reddest parts of the state, 61% of people. And we know it's only become more popular since then. Polling shows that now it's got 73% support, I think, including over 60% among Republicans. So this was a big deal. It halted all of the bad things that were happening, all those rural hospitals that were closing, all those tens of thousands of people who were dying unnecessarily and facing horrible health problems. But the legislature did come in as soon as it was passed in 2019 and had exactly the conversation we're having today. It's like Groundhog Day. They came in and said, why shouldn't they be working? We want to put work requirements in. If they can be on private insurance, we should move them to private insurance. Let's pass a bill saying they got to go to private insurance. We tried all these things, and as the good gentleman, I think, from 30 noted, they were rejected by the Trump administration. They've been out there. We've had these requests out there for 6 years. They've been denied, and that's just 2 of the 11.
Speaker.
Yeah, good gentleman.
I object. We're not going down the road of the bill. This is a history lesson.
We've gone far,
You don't need
quite a
history
ways.
lessons.
But, Mr. Speaker,
it's a good history lesson. Continue. Try to
Mr.
get back
Speaker,
to
I
debating
guess I
the
would-
waivers in the bill, please.
Thank you. I guess I would. This is dead on to the waivers of the bill. I'm discussing precisely the waivers of the bill and the fact that they have been tried before and failed. I don't know how I could be more pertinent. But at any rate, We've seen incredible benefits from this. I mean, health benefits, it did what the people wanted. Our life expectancy is now about 3 years longer than it is in the average of the states that have declined Medicaid expansion. There is measurable reductions in mortality. These are the things we can expect to be reversed if House Bill 138 becomes law. We can expect our constituents to die at greater frequency and to have lower life expectancies. Financial benefits. We realized great financial benefits over these last 6 years. We've seen, and I'm sure you've seen the analysis showing that we've saved about $80 million across the correction system, behavioral health system, and elsewhere. If you've read that Peterson report from The Economist, it shows $47 million in revenue, in tax revenue that we've been able to collect from Medicaid expansion. We've seen $900 million growth in gross state product. We've seen an increase, 362 jobs created. All of this would be reversed if we went back to the days before we had this. And that's not even counting the savings that we have from all of the medical bankruptcies that have been averted through having this. And I just want to quickly share a story of my own life and what this means to me in my district. A few months ago, my husband came home from Home Depot, found Bob, the guy who mows our lawn and cleans out our sprinklers, passed out cold in our driveway in a pool of blood. He'd fallen over, cracked his head on the driveway, and was out there unconscious. My husband, of course, called the ambulance, but he had a moment where he was like, gosh, I'm nervous about calling the ambulance. What if he's not insured? What if he's suddenly stuck with a $10,000, $20,000 bill that he can't pay and loses his truck and all his gardening equipment and can't even make a living anymore? Well, my husband went to the hospital with him. Thank goodness he was on Medicaid expansion, so he was okay. He didn't lose everything. Bob has kids. You think those kids aren't going to be affected if they're driven into medical bankruptcy and he loses his home and his truck and all his equipment? This has downstream effects on everybody in a person's life when they are left bare with no insurance. So I would just ask you, this House Bill 138 winds the clock back to a darker time. It winds us back to a time when tens of thousands of our fellow Idahoans were one accident away from bankruptcy and losing everything they had. It winds us back to a day when actually we were in a worse fiscal place. Passing this bill would actually cost taxpayers about $30 to $40 million more than keeping Medicaid expansion as we are. And I know that each one of you has thousands of people in your district who are like Bob. And so for them, for the people of Idaho, and frankly, for everybody, all of our health benefits when we have more providers, when we have more hospitals that are open. No matter how rich you are, you fall off a ladder, you're going to be hurting if the hospital in your area has shut down because of the the cost pressures of not having Medicaid expansion. I would ask you to respect the will of the people. The people worked incredibly hard to get us there, and I think they deserve to have their hard-won gains respected.